The day I found my first hole was the day my best friend came back from the dead. What a hook, man. It's so good. I'm so excited to revisit this. Creepypastas, or all scary stories for that matter, have always held a profound place in my heart, woven into the fabric of my most vivid memories. I remember the first time I was truly frightened by a tale, how it wasn't just the shivers down my spine or the racing of my heart that made it significant. It was the sense of being deeply, irrevocably connected to something far greater than myself. As the darkness crept around the edges of the room and the whispers of the story seemed to echo my own fears, I found solace in the shared experience of terror. Those moments, though unsettling, became a refuge where I could confront my own vulnerabilities. For me, creepypastas are more than just a thrill. They're a sanctuary where I face the shadows of my own fears and find strength in their confrontation. They remind me that even in the depths of darkness, there's a flicker of light, a resilience that guides me through the unknown. Each tale with its spine-chilling twists and turns is a testament to the courage we all possess, and it's within these narratives that I discover not only the depths of my own mind, but also a profound connection to the collective human experience. Plot Holes is a story from the No Sleep subreddit, posted I believe in 2013 by author David Knoppel. The early 2010s were prime creepypasta times. All those creative stories popping up left and right, creating a super saturated market of internet spooks. We all know the popular ones like Abandoned by Disney, Ben Drowned, The Russian Sleep Experiment, etc. But some flew under the radar. One I rarely saw get any coverage was Plot Holes. Is it the most well-written, the spookiest, or the most iconic? Absolutely not. But what it did to me, and continues to do to this day, cannot be overstated. With all that being said, why don't we hop into the story and you can see what I mean. So basically, our protagonist, we'll call him David, goes on to explain that his friend's name is Jake, and they were a couple of adventurous teenage souls. They would consistently go and visit this abandoned house in the middle of the woods. It was a new build project of an older lady who passed away before it was finished. So it's been sitting alone in the middle of nowhere, getting rained on, weather torn, but I'm sure nothing could go wrong with them just having some fun scooching about the place, right? Right? Oh god, holy fuck! Jake goes straight through the floor of the second story, crashes through the floor of the first, and gets impaled on a broken piece of wood. You could say it was a trap house. I said you could say it was a trap. In a panic, our guy takes off, because he's a stupid teenager, and goes home to spend the night just eating the trauma and burying that shit deep down inside. As a man, I approve of this coping mechanism. Why would he not immediately go for help? This brings up our first issue for me in the story, but as you may have noted in the intro, plot holes. Trying to act like he's chill and not suspicious, he gets up and goes to school the next day. And this is where things go from traumatic to out of control. Jake is there, standing around and chatting with friends. Of course, David is awkward about the interaction, trying to suss out if Jake remembers anything that happened. But of course not. It's like it never happened. The bell rings and the two split up to head to class. David spends the day wrestling with his emotions and confusion. Why was Jake alive? He goes on to say, "It's not like I wasn't excited my friend was back, but looking at him made something in me cringe." Jake was trying to hang out after school, but our guy, who is rightfully confused, declined the offer. There was really only one way to make sure he wasn't crazy. Gonna have to head back to the abandoned house. The whole situation is baffling, and just to make sure he isn't insane, he heads to check out the house after school. And from the moment he steps in through the door, the vibes are all off. He makes the shocking discovery of the hole still being in the floor with the wreckage in the basement clearly still there, just with no Jake. He looks up then to find the hole that should have been in the second floor is gone. No sign of it from upstairs either. He goes to revisit the hole in the first floor, and I'll let him describe this moment. "I saw something. Just a flash of something black, blacker than the darkness beyond my flashlight's range, shift and fly out of sight. I gasped and stumbled back, breathing heavily. I know I should have run, but my curiosity took hold, and my logical side said it was just some animal or trick of the light. He peeks over the edge again to find the debris completely cleaned up. What is a completely legitimate reaction, he takes the fuck off and heads home. After composing himself, he transitions into his research era. He found himself getting stuck down rabbit holes that didn't really line up with what he was experiencing, until he stumbled onto a post in regards to missing time. Can you guess the post title? If you guessed plot holes, congratulations! You've won! One guy named Dennis on the forum experienced something wildly similar to David, noting his wife was killed in a household accident when part of their house caved in during a storm. While trying to get her, he was knocked out by some other debris, and when he came to, he was sitting in the living room, and his wife was trying to wake him up. The house was fine with no signs of disaster, and she was alive. He eventually couldn't be around her due to the same uneasy feeling David had around Jake, so he dipped and spent most of his time on the road and researching the topic. Dennis found an interesting development when he noted a book review. A major point of this review was how the previous book in the series killed off a side character, only to bring him back in the next one so the plot could advance forward. The major sticking point was this situation is a, let's all say it together, plot hole. Dennis decides to run some experiments, and David sends a message to try to get more information. The next several days, David starts looking for these plot holes. While it starts off slowly, he eventually starts to catch little things here and there, like one of the girls went from wearing a skirt to a set of jeans between periods. David, you dog. This ended up being the catalyst to finding them all over the place. He ends up getting a response from the author of the post many days later, basically saying he was experiencing all the same phenomena David was. Things changing everywhere, and a shadowy black figure always there when it would happen. David hadn't been seeing these shadows, except for the one at Jake's accident, but now, every change he witnessed had these black-robed ghosties around. He notes that while we as people experience this often, you had to be a curious little kitty to really start seeing the spooky shit. This whole situation made David standoffish to Jake, and just like dandruff, started flaking on him constantly. It all starts to ramp up when David and Dennis were chatting, and the guy mentions one of his friends that was helping him research this just disappeared. And it gets even weirder when nobody even remembers the friend. When he went to check out his house, he found those black-robed shadows going full Molly Maid mode, cleaning up everything after an apparent struggle. The issue really goes DEFCON levels when the shadow he was watching turns, looks at him, and floats away. On his way out, he notices all traces of his friend, like photos, mail, film memorabilia from 2003's smash hit Darkness Falls were missing. Did I add that last detail? Yes, and in my fanfic, I like to imagine his friend was Cheney Clay. Just adding a little spice. David takes a beat and realizes, if these creatures could bring someone back from the dead, they could easily get rid of someone. This was his warning sign, so he decides, fuck this, I'm out, and starts trying to ignore all the plot holes he would see, ghosting Dennis, and even trying to hang out with Jake despite the vibes being all wrong. Dennis didn't take to the ghosting very well, and gradually starts working harder and harder creating new emails and usernames to get in contact with David. David finally decides to answer one of these when the subject line says, "They're after me. Get on Skype. I need help." So David, despite his fears, wants to help him if he's in real danger. They get into a Skype call, and Dennis is clearly terrified. He says the shadows have been following him around, but not to fix holes, just to watch him. When Dennis turns the camera around for David to see, you can feel the hell nah. Multiple of these things were just outside Dennis's window. David couldn't figure out what to say or do to help when suddenly a bunch of the creatures just start phasing into the apartment. And I'll just let this next bit of text explain the dread better than I ever could. The first reached forward with an inky arm and shoved it straight into his chest. There wasn't any blood, or even a sound save for Dennis's terrified scream. He began to writhe, grasping at his chest as the creature held him there by, I don't even know what. His spine, his heart, hell, it could have been his very soul for all I know. Then the others were on top of him. They fell onto him like a dark dog pile, consuming him in their dark presences. I couldn't scream. I couldn't look away. I just watched as he faded from view as those creatures piled onto him. Then slowly, ever so slowly, they backed away. Dennis was gone. I bit back tears as I saw the empty space he had been in. I knew what had happened. He was gone. Erased. No one would even remember him. He was a hole that had to be filled in and taken care of. Then their attention turned to the computer. To me. This is probably the most horrifying moment of the story when our main man David realizes he was now a plot hole that needed to be fixed. As he turns from his computer, he comes face to face with a horde of them. One reaches out into him and causes blinding pain to radiate through his body as others start piling onto him. He says they began pulling, and he could only describe it as the feeling of being erased. It's not long before he's stuck in a void of darkness. He has no voice, no limbs, and is just existing in an endless void of nothing. David has nothing left to do but ponder. He has thoughts about what Jake's purpose could have been, if this was death or some form of punishment, and if he might run into Dennis in this void one day. He finishes the story with the following lines. That's the end of my story. I wish it was better. I wish I could say I fought back and saved myself, at least that I was on the run. But some plots don't have happy endings. However, I'm sure I've left you wondering one final thing. If I'm dead, or erased, then how could I have written this? Well, my poor friend, you've just discovered your first plot hole. Be wary if you see any more. And that's the end of this crazy story. So let's get into my thoughts on the whole thing and explain why this story gave me an existential crisis. So from a surface level analysis, we have, by my calculations, 9 out of 10 spookiness. It almost takes the iconic imagery associated with the Grim Reaper and uses it in a new fashion. This is an interesting thought experiment where the Reaper's typical job in these types of tales is a personification of death. But here it's almost changing what death actually is. They go from being a singular entity to a whole team of IT guys making sure the story functions as intended. Not necessarily authors of the world, but rather lesser beings given enormous power to help a narrative move in the right direction. They have the power to kill, revive, and erase anyone or anything that they have to keep the story going. We could take this a step further and view them from a religious standpoint. A common statement in Christianity is God always has a plan. And could you imagine this being far more literal than we thought? The existence of free will, but only if you fit into a strategic playbook. And if not, these horrifying angels come and remove you from existence? Like, fuck, dude. Another thought I had while reading this again is the idea adjacent to reality being a simulation. Something out of our control we can't understand, controlling outcomes by adjusting things to push time in a certain direction. Athazagoraphobia, the fear of being forgotten, ignored, or overlooked. This story preys on this fear like a cheetah on wildebeests. It takes the phobia and melds it into a far more literal form of the word. You are legitimately afraid of these things, erasing not only your existence, but the memory of you as well, while leaving you completely aware and conscious in a space void of any ability to observe or be observed. This is a fear of mine, which might be why it took my existential dread and twisted it in a way that gave me nightmares for days. Not only did we witness someone be erased, but the end of the story insinuates that you are likely next on the chopping block. My biggest fear is the idea of being trapped in a state of awareness but unable to communicate. Just the thought of this as I'm writing is giving me anxiety I can't describe. It's a horrifying and all too real scenario for many people suffering from the various illnesses that take away the essence of who you are and leave you as a husk floating through time with nothing but confusion and frustration, a bitter and inevitable end where hoping for everything to just stop is your only comfort, and in this story, you don't even get that. Fuck, where's my vape? I need to chill out. I've listened to and read this story countless times, despite the fear it instills in me. That honestly might be why I do it. This little creepypasta from 2013 probably wasn't written with the intent to lead me into a confrontation of my fear. In a way, it's almost cathartic doing so. It's forced me to take a step back and look at who I am and the people around me. My family, my friends. I look at things differently. I try not to take a moment for granted anymore. I try to make sure every time my daughter squeezes my hand tight, my parents say I love you, or my grandma wraps me up in a hug, I live in that moment. I hold on to the emotions and tell myself I will never forget this. All I want to do is live a life I can look back on and know that someone I love can feel that way about me. If that's the case, then when I am eventually gone and forgotten, what I gave to the world can live on. And I got all of that from a spooky little scary story off the internet. Thank you all for watching. And as always, have a terrifying evening.